Hi guys, tonight we step quietly into a world that feels both familiar and impossibly distant. A world where you pull your cloak a little tighter, because the medieval cold cuts straight through whatever confidence you thought you had. You arrive in a village where winter dusk settles fast and every breath fogs the air like a tiny drifting cloud. Frost gathers on the edges of thatched roofs, and you notice your boots crunching on ground that has already stiffened into a sheet of ice. All around you, chimneys cough out thin trails of smoke that twist into the darkening sky. You feel the sting on your cheeks, the kind that reminds you that central heating is still centuries in the future, and you probably will not survive this if you rely only on optimism and a thin wool layer. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Now dim the lights and let the cold of this forgotten world slip around you as you begin to imagine how anyone could sleep here. You duck your head as you step through the crooked entryway of a small house, and a rush of icy air follows you inside. Winter dusk has swallowed almost everything outdoors, and the only light left is the faint glow of embers struggling in a small hearth. Medieval households relied heavily on this single pool of warmth, and you already sense how fragile it feels. A mainstream historical fact tells you that many peasant homes were built from wattle and daub, a technique using woven sticks packed with mud. It was cheap and quick, but about as insulating as a wet towel. The cold seeps through every seam, and you instantly understand why darkness and winter were such powerful forces in everyday medieval life. You look around. The room is cramped, low-ceilinged, and unevenly lit. Shadows stretch over every wall like long, reaching fingers. It takes a moment for your eyes to adjust. Once they do, you notice how your breath forms its own mist inside the room, drifting upward like pale smoke. The air indoors is only slightly warmer than the freezing wind outside. You rub your hands together and listen to the soft crackle of the hearth. That gentle sound becomes a kind of companion, a reminder that the family living here fights the cold each night with a flame that often feels too small for the job. Your fingers graze the rough walls that hold back the winter with more hope than actual strength. The surface feels uneven and a bit damp since moisture creeps through mud walls during long winters. There is a quirky little tidbit whispered by one villager who claims that some households stuffed gaps with whatever they had, including moss hair and even feathers plucked from unlucky chickens. It is not a glamorous way to fortify your home, but you take what you can get when the wind is determined to freeze your nose while you sleep. Your footsteps creak against wooden planks that have seen better days. A small family huddles near the hearth, sharing that shrinking warmth with the same instinctive closeness you might show under a blanket on a stormy night. They glance at you without much surprise, because visitors are common in harsh seasons. People stick together partly for survival, and partly because it feels kinder to suffer as a group than alone. The fire offers a steady orange glow, washing the room with a sleepy warmth that never quite reaches your toes. You crouch near it, stretching your hands out. Sparks rise, softly spiraling upward until they vanish. You can almost imagine falling asleep right here, your body curled next to the coals like a tired house cat. But even as you imagine that comforting thought, you know there is no luxury here. The hearth burns low because firewood is scarce. A single log might need to last an entire evening. Historians still argue whether communities in colder regions had consistent enough fuel supplies to survive the hardest winters, or if many families simply endured nights that hovered just above freezing. You picture the arguments, some scholars insisting that wood-gathering networks and communal forests were reliable enough, and others pointing out that countless medieval complaints describe shortages each winter. You feel the tension of those debates in this dim little room where every ember counts. A thin smoke haze hangs near the ceiling. The chimney is little more than a hole in the roof, and sometimes the wind pushes smoke back inside. You blink through the haze and feel the faint sting in your eyes. The family coughs from time to time, not from sickness, but from air that is forever flavoured with soot. It gives the home its familiar scent, a mix of burning wood, damp wool, straw, and something almost sweet from the stewing broth that has simmered for hours. You listen closely. Outside, the wind howls like a restless creature circling the house. It rattles loose shutters and sweeps icy dust across the village lanes. Inside, you hear murmured conversations, low and worn with fatigue. People talk quietly during winter evenings because every bit of energy is precious. You hear a gentle lull in voices when the fire pops, as if everyone is waiting to see whether it will hold steady or dim into darkness. Moments like that shape your sense of the night. You understand how fragile warmth feels in the Middle Ages and how every spark matters. You settle onto a small bench, feeling how cold the wood is beneath you. The chill creeps through your clothes with slow determination. You imagine sleeping here wrapped in thin layers, hoping the wind does not force its way through a new crack in the wall. You wonder how people train their bodies to accept such temperatures. You recognize that sleep here is not luxurious or peaceful, but practical, a nightly negotiation with discomfort. Your eyelids grow heavy as you watch the orange glow shift and flicker. Your mind drifts with the movement of the flames, and for a moment you sense how ordinary medieval nights depended on that hypnotic pulse of firelight. The family begins to settle into sleep, curling up near the hearth, pulling cloaks and blankets around themselves. You do not move. You simply breathe, letting the cold nip at your fingers, while your thoughts wander to the centuries of people who lived and slept exactly like this. You imagine every winter night they endured, every shiver, every cramped corner of warmth they claimed as their own. You let that memory settle over you like a thin blanket, and you sit there listening to the soft crackle of the fire, letting the cold of the Middle Ages become your own for a moment. You remain in that dim room a little longer, letting your eyes follow the glow of the hearth until it softens into a gentle blur. When you finally rise to stretch your legs, the cold settles around you again like an unwelcome cloak. Your breath fogs in front of your face, reminding you that winter has already tightened its grip on this village. You step toward the low doorway, brushing aside a curtain made from rough linen. A gust of icy air sweeps in as you exit the main room, and it feels like walking straight into a wall of needles. You pull your arms close to your chest and brace yourself. Out here, shivering thresholds are part of every evening ritual. The moment you cross from one space to another, the temperature drops sharply, and suddenly you understand how crucial simple architectural details were to the survival of ordinary medieval people. You pause under the lintel. The door is little more than a plank of wood propped into a frame that is not quite square. Gaps line the edges, thin enough to overlook in summer, but wide enough in winter to funnel icy draughts across your ankles. A mainstream historical fact points out that medieval homes rarely had the tight masonry or fitted woodwork that later buildings enjoyed. Even prosperous farmhouses struggled to keep out the cold. Poorer homes, like the one you stand in, simply tolerated it. You can almost imagine villagers stuffing spare cloth into cracks, or leaning heavy objects against doors to keep out even a little of the biting air. The threshold itself feels uneven beneath your boots. The packed earth has hardened into something like stone, and the edges near the doorframe glisten with a thin sheen of frost. You lower yourself carefully to run your fingertips along the surface. The cold almost burns. A quirky tidbit drifts through your thoughts, something a wandering storyteller once whispered. Some households sprinkled ash around doorways during winter nights because they believed ash could confuse malevolent spirits, and at the same time soak up moisture that crept under the door. Whether it worked or not is up for debate, but it certainly adds character to this chilly doorway. You step fully inside a smaller antechamber, a kind of entry space that barely counts as a room. The wind slips through a loose shutter and brushes against your cheek with the sting of a wet cloth fresh from freezing water. You breathe slowly and listen to the faint whistle of air squeezing through the imperfect seams in the wall. Instinctively, you pull your cloak around your shoulders. You picture villagers doing the same thing each evening, their tired bodies bracing themselves for the shock of cold before they reach the hearth. The house you explore is tiny, so the threshold zone becomes an odd mix of indoors and outdoors. The walls and ceiling protect you from snow and rain, but the temperature tells a different story. It is hard not to smile a little thinking about how modern standards would crumble here. You have walked only a few steps away from the hearth, and already your hands feel stiff, your nose prickles with cold, and your ears begin to ache. No wonder people congregated around fires and rarely strayed far from them during long winter nights. You run your hand across the wooden door again. The wood has expanded and contracted through countless seasons, leaving it warped and slightly bowed. You imagine a villager trying to repair it during a rare, mild afternoon, jamming new pegs into place or hammering a board over a fresh crack. Historians still argue whether peasants devoted much time to winterizing their homes, or if they accepted the cold as an inevitable companion. You sense that both possibilities hold some truth. Some families may have worked tirelessly to plug every gap. Others probably shrugged and went to bed in thick layers, resigned to the relentless draft that greeted them each night. You shift your stance and feel the way your weight causes the floorboards to creak. The sound is sharp and lonely, echoing through the narrow space. You picture how those creaks must have shaped the rhythms of medieval living. People knew which steps were safe, which ones squeaked, and where to place their feet to avoid waking children or livestock. That knowledge becomes a quiet comfort in a world where so little comfort is guaranteed. You lean closer to a corner of the wall where the daub has cracked. Cold air seeps through a thin fissure brushing across your knuckles. There is something strangely intimate about noticing the same floors that villagers saw every day, floors they covered with cloth straw or bits of old garments. You brush the crack gently and feel the way the cold pulses in and out with the breeze. The detail is small, but it speaks volumes about how winter nights felt for the poor. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just constant lingering discomfort. The ceiling above you droops slightly under the weight of years. Smoke from countless hearth fires has stained it a deep brown, almost black in some areas. The scent of old wood and soot blends with the sharp smell of outside air swirling through the threshold. It is a surprising blend, earthy and raw. You breathe it in and feel yourself settling into the rhythms of this place. It is not pleasant, but it is strangely grounding. You shift to look outside. The sky's nearly black now, a few stars peeking through the haze of cold. Snowflakes drift lazily across the village lanes, catching what little light spills from nearby windows. You imagine villagers stepping across their own thresholds, hugging their cloaks tight as they hurry from one home to another. Every transition between spaces, even short ones, demands courage and a steady acceptance of discomfort. You step back inside the small chamber, letting the faint warmth of the main room reach your skin. The difference is subtle but noticeable. You feel the temperature rise by perhaps a single degree. In this world, a single degree means everything. You brush your hands together, chasing away the numbness creeping into your fingers. The contrast between the hearthroom and the threshold becomes a lesson in survival. You realize how much mental effort medieval people spent on simply staying warm. You linger one more moment in the chilly antechamber, thinking about the families who once crossed it every night, shrugging off the cold that followed them indoors. You picture their tired faces, their chapped lips, their hands raw from work and winter wind. You sense how they braced themselves each time they opened the door, understanding that warmth was fleeting and cold was relentless. Then you turn slowly toward the hearthroom again, ready to move deeper into the sleeping world of this winter-bound village. You step back into the main room, letting the small rise in temperature brush across your face, while your eyes adjust once again to the gentle orange glow of the hearth. The air still carries that soft haze of smoke that clings to every beam and every woven basket hanging on the walls. You inhale slowly, feeling how the warmth rises in thin waves from the fire, almost like a living creature stretching after a long rest. As you settle closer, you notice something important about this space. Although the entire house is humble, the area around the hearth becomes the heart of winter life. This is where people talk, work, cook, and most importantly sleep when the cold presses too hard. You lower yourself onto a low stool and let your knees drift toward the warmth. For a moment you imagine how much security this one simple spot offered, in centuries when winter could easily turn deadly. Your eyes sweep the cramped gathering of objects arranged in a half-circle around the fire. The poor rarely had furniture to spare, yet everything here has a purpose. A wooden bench sits nearest the flames, a few stools cluster nearby. Baskets full of dried herbs hang overhead, swaying gently in the rising heat. From the way the family arranges themselves each night, you can tell that the hearth corner acts as their shared bedroom. People sleep in layers here, lying as close to the flames as they safely can. One well-accepted detail from medieval records shows that single-room living was extremely common among peasants, which means privacy did not exist, and comfort took whatever form necessity allowed. You shift closer and study the fire itself. It burns low and reddish, fed by sticks rather than logs. The flame dances with a sleepy rhythm, casting moving shadows across the faces of the family settling in for the night. The children sit directly on a heap of old sacks, rubbing their hands together as if trying to squeeze out every bit of warmth the fire can spare. The parents lean heavily against each other, their body language shaped by exhaustion and cold. You see how their posture changes the moment they face the hearth. Their shoulders drop, their bones loosen, and the tension they carry from working long winter days fades just a little. You notice something peculiar. The corner nearest the fire is slightly raised. It looks like packed earth shaped deliberately into a small platform. There is a curious little detail people sometimes overlook about poor medieval homes. Some families thicken the floor next to the hearth to create a warmer sleeping area because heat rose more strongly there. You run your palm across the surface and feel how the warmth gathers in that spot. It is not much, but it is enough to make a difference. People once positioned themselves here like cats stretching by a sunny window. The scents that drift around the hearth deepen the feeling of closeness. You smell dried rue leaves sprinkled earlier to counter insects. You smell wood smoke soaked into every blanket. You smell the faint sweetness of roots roasting in a clay pot tucked into the coals. The room becomes a mix of survival and comfort, something that feels almost sacred in a long winter. Sleep here grows from routine and necessity rather than indulgence. You picture how many nights families like this curled up together while winter winds rattled shutters and snow drifted against the walls. Your attention drifts upward. You watch smoke curl toward the roof hole and scatter into the icy air. The smoke stains along the rafters reveal years of fires, years of winters that forced people to gather in this exact spot. Some researchers wonder if the smoke helped warm the air slightly by creating a thicker layer near the ceiling similar to a natural insulation blanket. The idea is not proven, but the smoke definitely adds character to the room. It also stings your eyes and irritates your throat, reminding you that medieval warmth always came with a cost. You sit down on a woven mat that someone pulled beside the fire. The mat is old and frayed its reed stiff, but still functional. You imagine a villager weaving it by hand during a quiet winter morning, fingers numb yet determined. The mat creaks softly under your weight. You lean in toward the warmth, watching embers pulse like tiny red stars at your feet. When you study the hearth more closely, you realize why it meant so much. It does not simply heat the home. It acts as a symbol of safety, a fragile refuge against the cold pressing from every direction. A kettle hangs above the fire, suspended by a soot-darkened hook. Steam rises gently from its spout, carrying the faint aroma of some herbal infusion. You watch droplets gather and fall with a soft hiss. A surprising footnote from old descriptions of peasant households notes that families often kept a pot warm through the night, so they could drink something hot before dawn or mix quick broth for sick children. The warmth from that single pot mattered more than most modern people could imagine. Your gaze shifts to the shadows beyond the hearth circle. The edges of the room feel almost unreachable from where you sit. The cold dimness beyond the fire becomes a strange landscape of unclear shapes. You see an overturned bucket, a pile of tools, and a stack of firewood that looks painfully small. You suspect the family rationed each branch with careful judgment. The fire crackles softly, reminding you that every spark is precious. When you picture the family sleeping here, you realize that their dreams, if they had any energy left for dreaming, happened within the orange glow that protected them from freezing nights. You stretch your legs toward the warmth and imagine lying down where the children sleep. Their makeshift bedding consists of old blankets, worn cloaks, and whatever soft cloth the family owned. The youngest child pulls a faded wool covering to his chin, curling into a warm ball that reminds you of a puppy finding its perfect resting place. You feel a tug of tenderness at the scene. Nothing luxurious exists here, yet you sense a deep connection between the family and their hearth. The fire pops again, scattering a few sparks. You watch them fade quickly on the packed earth. In moments like this, the difference between comfort and danger narrows. A stray ember might ignite straw or clothing, which is why families monitored the fire even in their sleep. Some academic voices are divided on the idea that peasants kept a strict fire-tending rotation during winter nights. Some suggest families trusted the embers to smoulder safely. Others insist that someone always stirred in the night to adjust the fire. You sense that the truth might have varied from village to village. You rest your palm on the nearest blanket. It feels rough but warm from the fire. You imagine sliding down to the floor and curling near the embers yourself, letting the heat seep into your bones while the sounds of winter fade into background murmurs. You realize you could almost fall asleep here if you stayed still long enough. The hearth corner is a haven, a fragile island of warmth in a world ruled by cold. You let that thought settle and allow your breathing to match the quiet, steady rhythm of the fire before preparing to move deeper into the sleeping world of medieval winter life. You ease yourself upward from the hearth circle, letting the warmth cling to your clothes for as long as it can before slipping away. You take a few slow steps toward a darker corner of the room where the bedding waits. The glow from the fire dims quickly as you move farther from it, leaving the outlines of objects to blend into gentle shadow. You feel your toes curl inside your shoes as the temperature drops again. Even inside this house, winter has a way of reminding you that every inch away from the flames brings a new level of cold. You pause for a moment and listen. The family has begun preparing their bedding. Rustling cloth, rearranging sacks and patting down old straw with the same tender rhythm people use today when they fluff pillows or pull blankets straight. When you kneel beside the bedding, the texture surprises you. The straw rustles sharply like thin bones shifting under your hands. It feels prickly and alive, but not in a comforting way. You press down gently and notice how the straw collapses beneath your weight, forming a shallow cushion. Sleep on these straw pallets is nothing like the thick mattresses of modern comfort. One detail found in multiple medieval household inventories confirms that straw pallet beds were almost universal for the poor. People refreshed the straw when insects became unbearable, or when the cold made the old bedding too brittle to soften. You imagine how sleep quality depended heavily on the freshness of the straw and the small rituals of smoothing it out at night. You settle onto the pallet for a moment, feeling each piece shift beneath you. It rustles loudly, making the children glance over at the sound. You can tell the family is used to it. They barely react, moving instead with practiced hands that pat down edges and shake loose debris. As your fingers sift through the straw, you come across small bits of leaf and husk. Sometimes even tiny splinters hide inside. There is a small but amusing fact whispered in old letters and village anecdotes that people occasionally complained about sharp kernels poking their backs or legs throughout the night. It is the type of tiny hardship that would drive a modern sleeper mad, yet medieval villagers likely accepted it without much comment. You run your palm across the top layer and sense the faint warmth trapped between the straw and the worn cloth placed over it. These cloth covers are the only thing standing between your skin and a bed of sticks. The fabric feels rough, woven from coarse wool that scratches your fingertips. The edges are frayed. A few patches have been sewn in with uneven stitches. Someone worked hard to keep this bedding usable, nudging it through each winter like a tired but loyal companion. You stretch out fully to test the sensation. The uneven shapes beneath you force your body into odd angles. Your shoulder rests slightly higher than your hip. Your head dips into a shallow pocket where the straw has thinned. You feel the cold radiating upward from the ground, creeping along your spine. When the wind slips through a crack in the wall, the chill intensifies as if tugging at the blanket around your shoulders. The entire experience reminds you that medieval sleep is not something soft and indulgent. It is survival lying quietly under the cover of night. You turn your head toward the family. They have settled into their own pallet. The father adjusts his blankets while the mother lifts a small child and shifts her closer so she can share body heat. Their movements are slow and practiced, shaped by nights upon nights of repetition. You see the child curl up her tiny feet, disappearing beneath a wool covering. Her sigh sounds like a soft puff of air in the cold silence. Your hand brushes a small wooden box tucked near the bed. Inside it, faint traces of herbs linger. One unusual observation found in several rural traditions suggests that some households mixed dried lavender, mint or rosemary into their straw as a simple comfort or an attempt to mask the smell. Whether it helped much is unclear, but you sense how the small gesture might have made bedtime a little sweeter in a world where sweetness was limited. When you lift your head again, you notice another detail. The pallet nearest the hearth sits slightly raised on a wooden frame, while the others lie directly on the ground. Only the lucky few slept on raised pallets in poor households. The frame creaks when the father shifts his weight. You touch it gently and feel the splintered texture beneath your fingers. Some woodworkers claim that raising a pallet prevented drafts from seeping directly into the bones at night. This belief appears again and again in various old notes, although different specialists disagree on how effective the technique really was. Some experts argue that a raised frame blocked the cold better. Others claim it changed little, because the room itself remained freezing. You suspect both opinions contain pieces of truth. You lift yourself from the pallet and sit cross-legged beside it. The light from the hearth flickers against your knees. You watch how shadows ripple across the straw, revealing just how uneven the bedding really is. It takes only a small movement for the straw to shift into new ridges and awkward lumps. You imagine tossing gently in the night and having to readjust the bedding with half-frozen fingers, brushing the straw back into place so your hips would not rest against a sharp piece. Your thoughts wander to the smell. There is no hiding from it. Straw carries a dry, earthy scent mixed with a hint of dust and old fibres. In some corners, the smell sharpens where moisture once seeped in. The blankets draped over the straw add their own aroma of smoke and wool. The combination is strong but not unpleasant once you settle into it. After all, scent becomes part of the sleeping experience here. Each inhale ties you more intimately to this cold little home. You lie flat again this time, closing your eyes to imagine sleep creeping up. The fire crackles softly behind you. The faint rustling of the straw becomes the lullaby of the room. For a moment you feel yourself drifting into the simple rhythm of medieval night. The prickling under your shoulder is part of the experience. The slight chill along your legs is expected, and the warmth from the blankets, though thin, feels almost sweet in its effort. When you open your eyes again, you glance toward the edges of the pallet. A few small stones sit along the side. They caught your attention earlier, and now you understand what they are for. One household memory, recorded in an old winter journal, notes that people sometimes heated small stones in the fire, wrapped them in cloth, and tucked them near their feet or stomach to soften the cold. You touch one carefully. It is still warm. That small heat source makes you smile. It is humble, clever, and surprisingly effective. You shift your weight and let your hands rest flat on the straw. You feel every ridge, every hollow, every imperfection that makes this bedding real. You linger there until the smell of smoke and the rustling of straw blend into something strangely peaceful. Then slowly you rise from the pallet and prepare to explore the next corner of this cold and sleeping world. You step away from the straw pallet, brushing a few stray pieces from your clothes as you ease back into the dim glow near the hearth. Your eyes adjust once more to the shifting dance of firelight, and you move toward a pile of blankets folded neatly in the corner. At first glance they look harmless, soft even, maybe a little worn. But when you kneel to inspect them, an itch prickles your wrist before you even touch the fabric. You pause, narrowing your eyes with a faint suspicion. You lift a corner of the blanket and shake it lightly. A tiny cloud of dust rises, carrying with it the unmistakable hint that something lives within these folds. You place a hand on the blanket and feel the rough, heavily used wool beneath your fingers. The poor rarely washed their bedding in winter because water was scarce and cold. Water could freeze skin numb. Instead, they shook out blankets, aired them over smoky fires, or simply accepted whatever crawled inside. One well-documented point in medieval housekeeping notes that bedding was passed down through generations, patched again and again, sometimes to the point where more patch existed than original cloth. You trace the uneven stitches with your fingertip and imagine someone repairing this by candlelight, their hands stiff from cold. You bring the blanket closer to your face. A faint sour scent clings to it, the result of smoke, sweat, old wool and time. Your ears pick up a soft rustle inside the fabric when you fold it over your arm. You do not need to look closely to know what that sound means. Fleas, the tiny tyrants of medieval sleep. You lower yourself to sit on the floor, the blanket draped across your lap. You study the texture more carefully now, feeling each little lump or crease. You scratch your wrist reflexively, even though nothing has bitten you yet. There is a curious little observation recorded in several old domestic guides that people sometimes sprinkled fine ash or crushed herbs into the folds of their bedding in an attempt to discourage fleas. It rarely worked for long, but it offered a small psychological victory in a world where you fought cold hunger and insects every night. You spread the blanket out flat. Fleas prefer the seams, so you inspect the edges. A few dark specks cling there, too small to see clearly in the dim light. You rub one between your thumb and index finger. It disappears instantly. The family does not pay much attention to your inspection. They are used to it. Fleas have lived with them their entire lives, just as they lived with their parents and grandparents. You feel a pang of sympathy for a child trying to fall asleep, while tiny creatures nibble at her ankles. You shake the blanket again. Loose fibers drift upward like strands of fog. You notice the fabric feels slightly oily from natural lanolin that still clings to the wool. Lanolin offers a bit of warmth, and in cold months any extra warmth feels like treasure. You imagine someone wearing this blanket around their shoulders during the day, then laying it carefully on the pallet at night, grateful for whatever protection it gave. Bed coverings like this were part cloak, part coat, part shield against the cold. You press your palm against the wool and think about the sensation. It is warm in some spots and cold in others, depending on how close they were to the hearth earlier. You can almost map the rhythm of family life by these temperature differences. The warm patches belong to shoulders, backs, and tired limbs. The cold corners belong to fearsome winter drafts that slip beneath the door and snake across the floor. You shift your attention to the underside of the blanket. As you lift it, something bites your forearm lightly. The sting is tiny but unmistakable. You let out a small, frustrated breath and brush it away. It is possible you carried this prickly little passenger every night if you lived here. Sadly, this is not a rare annoyance. Several surviving complaints from medieval households describe how insects disrupted sleep far more than cold did. People feared the cold, but they resented fleas. Cold only numbed you. Fleas made you toss and scratch until exhaustion won. You glance at the family settling into their sleeping places again. The mother shakes out her own blanket with one powerful snap. Fleas scatter briefly before returning to their favourite hiding places. Nobody reacts dramatically. For them, this is routine. You reflect on how medieval life trained people to accept constant irritation. Inside these homes, the line between comfort and discomfort blurred into one long compromise. You take one last look at the blanket in your lap. The wool fibres catch the firelight in delicate patterns. It strikes you as oddly beautiful for something that makes you itch. This bedding is soft in intention, but harsh in reality. It wants to warm you, yet it never lets you forget the world you live in. You fold the blanket and place it back on the pallet. The child immediately scoots closer, wrapping herself in it despite its flaws. She sighs softly, a tiny exhale of relief. Watching her, you understand something that no lecture or book can fully convey. In this time, warmth is precious enough that people gladly accept a few bites in exchange for it. You stay there a moment longer, letting the scene settle. The light flickers over the family, soft and rhythmic. The blanket rustles. A flea jumps. Someone scratches their arm and murmurs sleepily. You feel both the discomfort and the tenderness of it all, mixed in one strangely intimate moment. The air holds an earthy smell of wool ash, and human life pressed close by winter hardship. A thought slides quietly into your mind. Certain specialists continue to question whether flea populations truly exploded in winter, or if they simply felt worse because people huddled together more tightly in the cold. The truth is hard to pin down, because evidence points in different directions. What you know for sure is that fleas are here. They are part of the night, part of the story. You cannot ignore them. As you rise from the pallet and brush off your clothes, you catch one final glimpse of the blankets arranged in their rough-patched beauty. They are imperfect, itchy, and shared with tiny intruders. Yet they are the only barrier between the cold floor and the vulnerable bodies curled beneath them. You turn toward the hearth again, letting the faint warmth guide you forward as you prepare to explore the next layer of medieval winter sleep. You stand slowly stretching your arms as the chill settles once more over your shoulders. Your eyes drift toward the bundle of clothing hanging near the hearth, each piece arranged carefully on a wooden peg. At first it looks like a cluttered collection of everyday garments. Tunics, cloaks, hose, and a few shirts stitched together from countless scraps. But as you walk closer, you realize these are not simply outfits for the next day. These are night garments too. In a world where the cold sometimes bites harder than hunger, what you wear to bed becomes your closest companion. You reach for one of the tunics and pinch the fabric between your fingers. The material grazes your skin with a coarse and scratchy texture. Poor villagers rarely slept in nightclothes designed for comfort. Instead, they wore whatever layers they owned, often the same clothes they had worked in earlier. You turn the tunic inside out and notice patches sewn in dozens of places. One well-supported detail from medieval clothing studies shows that lower-class garments were repaired so frequently that original cloth might disappear beneath years of mending. Clothing was not fashion. It was survival stitched together with determination. You slip the tunic over your arm, testing its weight. It feels heavier than you expected. Wool back then held its density because it was only lightly processed. The heft gives you a faint sense of security, like wearing a shield against the cold. You imagine lying on a straw pallet with this wrapped tight around your body, letting it press you down, while winter winds whip against the walls. You lift a cloak next. This one is older, its edges frayed, and its surface smooth with age. You drape it briefly over your shoulders and let the warmth sink into the fabric. Cloaks served as blankets during winter sleep doubled and sometimes tripled over the stomach or chest. People layered them until their bodies felt like bundled provisions. A soft creak from the rafters reminds you that a thin house stands between you and the frozen world outside. You glance over at the family. They're gathering their clothing intentionally, choosing the warmest items for the night. The father pulls on an extra tunic, its neckline stretched and worn. The mother wraps a hooded cloak around her shoulders, tying it loosely so she can adjust it while lying down. The children already wear as many layers as their small bodies can handle. Watching them prepare reminds you that warmth required planning. You could not simply crawl under a blanket. You built your own cocoon out of every scrap of fabric you owned. You reach for a long woolen scarf. It is stiff from repeated exposure to smoke and dampness. You rub your thumb along its length and watch dust scatter. Several small holes dot the fabric. Some families stuffed holes with spare threads, or even hair from combing's a small but practical trick you might overlook in a modern world. The scarf feels rough against your cheek when you test it, yet comforting in its warmth. You wrap the scarf around your neck and imagine lying down with it pulled over your chin, trapping the heat of your breath inside. People needed every bit of warmth they could manage. Clothing at night became part of the bedding. Tunics worked like sheets. Cloaks substituted for padded blankets. Hoods took the place of modern pillows by shielding ears and keeping precious heat close to the skull. You study the layers hanging on the wall again, and notice a small pouch tucked inside a cloak fold. Inside it are dried herbs mixed with coarse salt. One small record from a rural household account mentions families rubbing salt into the insides of their garments during winter because salt supposedly protected wool from dampness and insects. You bring the pouch to your nose. Its scent is sharp, earthy, and soothing. It feels like a tiny charm meant to hold together a tiny bit of comfort. A soft sigh escapes your lips as you feel the fabric loosen around your shoulders again. You lift another garment and admire the uneven stitching. Each stitch tells a small story of someone sitting by dim firelight, with chilled fingers trying to mend holes while the wind roared outside. You picture a tired mother patching a sleeve while her children slept, or a young man repairing a tear in his only tunic, fearing that frostbite might reach him first if he allowed cold air to slip through the fabric. As your fingers move across the cloth, you think about how heavy these layers must have felt in sleep. You shift your shoulders under the cloak and experience it yourself. The fabric presses you down like a gentle weight, almost like a firm hand resting across your chest. Maybe it helped people sleep by grounding them, or perhaps it made sleep more restless. Some modern researchers question whether peasants could fully relax under so many layers, or if they woke frequently adjusting garments that shifted in the night. You understand why such questions matter because the weight you feel now begins to tug at your muscles. You glance toward the hearth where a faint wave of warmth still rolls outward. The family is crawling into their shared sleeping space. The father loosens his belt so the tunic falls more comfortably across his torso. The mother tucks her cloak beneath her knees before settling it over her back. A child wraps her scarf around her head until only her small nose is visible. You sense the importance of layering. It turns their fragile bedding into a safe place. You find yourself wanting to mimic them, pulling the cloak tighter around your shoulders, as if joining their nightly ritual. You step away from the wall and kneel near the pallet again, arranging the cloak across your lap. The wool radiates a slight warmth, carrying heat absorbed earlier from the hearth. You stroke the fabric with your fingertips, admiring its stubborn loyalty. These garments might be patched, frayed, stretched, and stained, but they protect their wearers night after night without complaint. As you shift the cloak, a faint jingling sound rattles at the hem. You bend closer and discover tiny metal fragments stitched into the edge. They appear to be old coins, hammered flat and sewn into place. A passing mention in a regional folktale collection suggests some villagers added small metal pieces to their clothing to weigh it down during winter sleep so the edges would not lift when they shifted at night. You test the idea by letting the hem fall across your foot. It stays put. Clever, practical, quietly brilliant. You tuck the cloak around your sides and lie down on the pallet again. Your body sinks slightly into the uneven straw. The clothing warms you more quickly now. You feel the gentle embrace of the layered garments pressing close. The scratchiness no longer bothers you. Instead, you become aware of how the fabric traps each breath, forming a small bubble of warmth around your face. You close your eyes for a moment. The fire crackles softly. The family settles in with low murmurs. The wool around your shoulders becomes a small pocket of comfort in a cold room. You sense how these layers protect you, not only from icy air, but also from the unsettling feeling of vulnerability that comes with winter. You open your eyes again and sit up slowly, letting the cloak slide off your shoulders with a soft whisper of fabric. You fold it carefully and return it to its peg. The wool hangs there like a silent guardian waiting for the next frozen night. You take one last lingering look at the garments arranged along the wall. They are humble yet powerful, fragile yet determined. They are the armour of sleep in a world where cold can steal your breath, your warmth, and even your life. You inhale a long breath, feeling the weight of these layers in your imagination, then turn toward the centre of the room, ready to understand how families used their own bodies as warmth when clothing alone was not enough. You rise slowly, letting the wool layers slip from your imagination, as you turn your attention toward the family settling closer together on the pallet. The fire hums softly behind you. A faint glow shimmers across the straw, drawing gentle halos around heads, shoulders, and arms. As you watch them inch nearer to one another, you begin to understand something essential. In the biting cold of medieval winter nights, warmth was not only borrowed from clothing or wood, it was shared directly from body to body. You ease yourself down beside them close enough to feel that delicate envelope of human heat that forms when people huddle together. It feels fragile at first, like a bubble that could burst with one careless movement, yet it grows steadily as more bodies join in. You observe the father shift his position so that his back presses firmly against the mother's side. She in turn wraps an arm around one of the children, who burrows deeper into her cloak until only a small tuft of hair shows. The older child scoots toward the father, pressing her knees against his thighs. Their movements are calm and practice shaped by years of cold nights. A consistent pattern found in many medieval village accounts describes how families arrange themselves in careful order, placing children in the centre and adults on the outside to shield them from drafts. You feel the logic in it immediately. The outer edges catch the cold first. The centre becomes a tiny sanctuary. You lower your hands to the straw and feel the faint rise of warmth where bodies have already rested. It is not much, but enough to notice. You slip closer and the family barely reacts. Sharing warmth is not a private gesture here. It is expected. It is survival disguised as affection. You sense that even strangers during emergencies would be welcomed into these tight family circles. Not for comfort alone, but because every extra body strengthened the warmth. You listen to the sound of breathing, slow inhales, soft exhales. Together they form a gentle rhythm you could sink into. In a quiet room like this, human breath becomes one of the most reassuring sounds. You imagine how comforting it must have been for people living through endless winters when storms raged outside and frost crept beneath the door. Your gaze drifts across the small faces in front of you. The younger child, warm from her mother's arms, relaxes more deeply with each breath. Her cheek rests against worn wool. Her eyelashes tremble slightly as sleep approaches. You notice the slight rise and fall of her shoulders, and your own body instinctively matches her pace. A warmth not entirely physical begins to settle across your chest. You shift your weight to sit more comfortably among them. The father glances at you briefly. He tilts his head with a small smile, the kind that holds tiredness and acceptance in equal measure. You smile back. You are part of their sleep circle now. You sense how important this connection is. Without shared warmth, the winter nights would be harsher and longer. Your arm brushes lightly against the older child, and you feel how cold she still is. She adjusts her position so her back presses against your side. Her warmth begins to seep into your sleeve. You realize how incredibly close people lived with each other in these times. No personal boundaries, no private space, just bodies pressed together like pieces of a puzzle, forming a single warm shape in the darkness. You pull one of the thin blankets over your legs and the child pulls part of it toward herself without hesitation. You cover both of you. The simple act feels tender. There is a small note preserved in a rural chronicle describing how villagers joked that winter turned everyone into affectionate creatures. People who barely exchanged words during the day often curled together at night. Not because they wanted closeness, but because the cold left them no choice. In time, the necessity became a quiet comfort. You lean closer to the mother, who shifts just enough to give you space near the warmer centre. Her cloak feels thick against your arm. Her presence radiates a steady calm. She hums something under her breath, a soft and nearly silent tune. It might be meant for the children, or perhaps she hums simply to keep herself focused while waiting for sleep. Her voice vibrates gently through the layers of fabric. As the circle tightens, you understand that body heat becomes its own kind of currency in winter. It is distributed, carefully shared, intentionally, treasured quietly. You imagine nights when the cold felt even worse than this. Nights when the fire nearly died. Nights when snow buried doorways and people had no chance to fetch extra wood. On those nights, families must have pressed even closer, turning the tiny circle into a cramped knot of limbs, wool and breath. You look toward the door. A draft slips through the frame, brushing across the father's back. He shivers, then immediately shifts closer to his daughter, using his own body as a shield. You feel that shiver travel around the group like a small wave. Then the warmth returns as the circle adjusts. How many nights like this did medieval people endure, cold pushing in, warmth pushing back? You think for a moment about how contradictory this sleep arrangement must have felt. On one hand, deeply comforting, on the other, cramped and difficult. People probably woke often, nudging elbows into ribs, adjusting blankets, shifting to relieve sore muscles. Some historical writings reference this pattern, indirectly mentioning restless nights and frequent repositioning. But they also mention families who remembered winter nights as times of closeness. Nights when you felt your loved ones breathing beside you, steady and alive. A small sound rises near your ear. The older child mumbles something in her sleep, her voice soft and wavering. You cannot understand the words, but they carry a sweetness that softens the cold pressing around you. You adjust the blanket slightly so she stays covered. The act feels natural. The warmth grows stronger. It wraps around you like a slow, moving tide. You notice how your own breathing grows deeper. Your muscles loosen. Your eyelids grow heavy. Shared warmth has a way of inviting sleep even when discomfort lies beneath it. Before you let yourself drift too far, you slowly lift your body from the pallet. The warmth breaks instantly. A cool draft finds your legs. You shiver, realizing how vulnerable winter nights truly were. You brush a hand gently across the blanket covering the children. Then you rise quietly, stepping away from the tight circle of warmth. You glance back once more. The family, woven together like a single shape, has already begun to fade into rest. Their breath rises gently into the dim air. Their closeness glows like a small ember in the vast cold of the medieval night. You inhale deeply, feeling traces of their warmth still clinging to your clothes, and turn toward the far corner of the room where other companions wait to share the night in their own unexpected way. You move quietly across the room, letting the last traces of human warmth slip from your skin as you approach a wooden partition near the side wall. A faint rustling sound rises behind it, soft and rhythmic. At first you think it might be the wind brushing something loose, but as you draw closer you catch the unmistakable scent of animals. Warm, musky, earthy, it fills the air in a way that is strangely comforting when the cold grows sharp enough to sting the inside of your nose. You lift the edge of the partition and peer into the small space beyond. There, nestled on a bed of straw, lie the other night companions of this medieval household. A goat rests with her legs tucked neatly under her body, her breath rising in misty clouds. Two chickens huddle together beside her feathers, puffed out like miniature shields against the cold. You feel the warmth radiating from them before you even step fully inside. It is gentle but constant, like the slow exhale of a sleeping giant. You crouch down, letting the straw shift beneath your knees, and the goat lifts her head to look at you with calm, curious eyes. You lower your hand toward her. She sniffs at your fingers, then nudges you softly with her nose. Her warmth is almost surprising. People often forget how much heat a single goat can generate. One consistent detail found across rural winter accounts is that families kept livestock indoors not only for the animal's safety, but also to help warm the living space. A body is a furnace no matter who or what it belongs to. The goat settles back down, and you feel her warmth spreading through the narrow space like a quiet blessing. You shift your gaze toward the chickens. Their feathers gleam softly in the dim light. You listen to their gentle clucks, low and vibrating. The sound blends with the crackle of the hearth beyond the partition, forming a simple night melody. With your hand, you smooth a small patch of straw near them. Beneath the surface, the straw is surprisingly warm. The chickens shuffle closer, unconcerned by your presence. You understand why the poorest families often let their animals sleep near or even on their bedding. Warmth did not discriminate. If it kept you alive, it was welcome. You ease yourself into a sitting position, letting the animal's warmth touch your legs. The goat shifts her weight, releasing another wave of heat. You inhale deeply. The scent is strong but not unpleasant. It carries notes of hay wool and earth. You sense how deeply intertwined animals were with daily life. They were food, labour, companionship, and in winter they were heaters that never went out. You smile softly, imagining how many medieval children fell asleep with the comforting presence of a goat pressed against their feet. You stroke the goat's back. Her fur feels thick and slightly oily. A few flakes of straw cling to her coat. You remember that many medieval households brushed their livestock each evening, not for cleanliness alone, but because cleaner coats held warmth better. One charming observation found in a minor monastic record mentions that monks believed brushing an animal during winter was an act of mutual charity. The goat gave warmth, and the human gave comfort. You like the idea. It feels true in this moment. You lean back, letting your shoulders rest against the partition. Through the thin wood you hear the soft movements of the family on the other side. A murmur here, a sigh there. Two worlds sharing the same night, human and animal warmth intertwining in quiet cooperation. You feel how naturally this arrangement makes sense. In a cold climate with fragile walls and thin bedding, survival required creative partnerships. You focus on the sound of the chickens again. Their soft rustling settles into a repeating rhythm that lulls your mind. You feel yourself growing calmer as your body absorbs the warmth, trapped between straw and fur. Your fingers glide across the straw, and you notice how dry and insulating it feels when packed closely. Straw has always been a friend in cold seasons, both for humans and animals. Families refreshed it often not only for hygiene but also because fresh straw holds warmth far better than old flattened bundles. The goat exhales audibly. Her breath brushes your arm warm and moist. You cannot help but smile. It is like sitting beside a loyal dog who happens to smell like a barn and radiate the perfect amount of heat. You imagine cold nights when the children sneaked over to nap against her warm flank, giggling as she flicked her ears. You can easily see why livestock slept indoors before barns became separate structures. A quiet thought drifts into your mind. Some rural traditions hint that people believed animals detected weather changes better than humans. Villagers watched goats and chickens settle differently when a severe frost approached. It might have been superstition, or it might have held practical truth. Animals respond to cold more instinctively than people. Whether this belief was accurate or not remains uncertain, but you can see how such ideas would arise in homes, where humans and animals shared the same sleeping space. You shift forward to place your hand on the goat's side again. The slow rise and fall of her breathing is almost meditative. You rest your palm there for a long moment, letting your own breath align with hers. There is something deeply soothing about sharing warmth with a creature who neither judges nor speaks. She simply exists solid and steady in the cold room. You glance toward the chickens. One of them ruffles her feathers and hops slightly, then settles again with a soft cluck. You recognize how easily such small movements could wake a medieval sleeper. Nights were not silent. They were filled with rustling, shifting, scratching, and breathing. Sleep came in waves rather than long, uninterrupted stretches. But each sound, though imperfect, became part of the household's normal chorus, a kind of living lullaby only found in ancient winters. You take one last slow breath, feeling the heat from the animals seep into your legs and chest. Then you rise carefully, giving the goat one gentle stroke along her neck. She blinks at you with calm, content eyes. You smile and let the straw whisper beneath your feet as you step back toward the partition. When you lower the wooden panel behind you, the animals remain a warm presence in the back of your mind. Their quiet companionship lingers on your skin as you prepare to explore the cold breath of the night itself, and how it shaped every sleeping moment. You step away from the partition and move toward the center of the room again, where the glow of the hearth stretches only a faint arm across the floor. As you breathe in, you feel the temperature shift. The warm animal-scented air fades, replaced by something sharper and colder. You pause and watch your next exhale drift upward in a pale silver cloud. It hovers in front of your face for a moment before dissolving into the dark. That simple sight tells you everything. The air inside this home is nearly as cold as the air outside. You draw in another breath slow and steady, and your chest tightens slightly from the chill. You leave the area near the hearth and walk toward a wall where the fire's glow barely reaches. Your breath appears more clearly here, curling like thin smoke. You feel the temperature around you sink. You lift your hand and blow gently into it. A small plume of warm air escapes your lips and floats upward. You watch the cloud drift, half fascinated and half unsettled. In this world, the fact that you can see your own breath indoors is not a warning sign. It is normal. It is simply winter. You kneel and place your hand against the wall. The surface is damp and cold, almost icy. A thin film of moisture coats the rough daub. You pull your hand away and rub your fingers together. You imagine the villagers doing the same throughout the night, noticing the cold creeping into every corner of their home. One regularly mentioned observation in medieval building notes explains that single-room houses had poor ventilation during winter because families blocked cracks to keep out drafts. This made breath condense more easily indoors, leaving walls slick with moisture by morning. You look toward the ceiling and see faint wisps of condensed breath swirling upward from the family sleeping near the hearth. Each exhale adds to the small cloud forming above them. The air shimmers softly, reflecting the firelight. In this moment, the entire house feels like a lung expanding and contracting with every sleeper. You walk slowly across the room, letting your footsteps fall softly. You exhale deliberately now, watching each breath drift like tiny ghosts. There is something strangely peaceful about seeing the rhythm of your own breathing, almost like watching mist over a frozen pond. Yet it also reveals a harsh truth about medieval nights. If your breath is visible, your body is losing heat, and heat was something no one could waste. You stop near a gap between two loose boards. A faint draft slips through and brushes against your calves. You feel the cold rush upward like a warning. You crouch and blow gently into the gap. Your breath forms a cloud that is immediately torn apart by the incoming air. You sit back on your heels and listen to the faint whistle the draft makes as it squeezes through the wood. People must have heard this sound throughout winter nights, reminding them that their homes were not sealed fortresses but fragile shells against the cold. You move closer to the sleeping family again, careful not to step on the scattered straw. The air feels slightly warmer here, but still cold enough that your breath remains visible. The children sleep curled into tight knots, their bodies conserving heat with instinctive precision. Their small clouds of breath rise and mingle into one gentle plume above them. You feel your heart soften at the sight. A thought drifts through your mind about the way people interpreted breath in the cold. There exists a small collection of folk tales suggesting that some villagers believed visible breath revealed the presence of wandering spirits in winter. Cold nights were times when the boundaries between worlds felt thin. Whether such stories reflected genuine belief or simply attempts to entertain children during long, dark evenings remains uncertain, yet they add a layer of gentle mystery to the scene unfolding around you. You sit down quietly on the floor and allow your own breath to join the slow-moving cloud above the family. You inhale deep, then let the exhale drift toward the ceiling. The air carries your warmth away and you feel a slight shiver working through your shoulders. A small discomfort, but one that medieval people would have felt constantly. You rub your arms and look toward the roof hole where the faintest wisp of smoke escapes. The cold air slipping through that opening mixes with everything you exhale, making each breath appear even more dramatic. You lower yourself further, lying briefly on the pallet next to the family. The cold air near the floor wraps around you. You lift your head and exhale slowly. The cloud floats at the height of your face rather than rising. It lingers in the dim space like a fragile veil. You imagine waking in the darkness, seeing your own breath hover inches from your nose, knowing that warmth remains a very distant luxury. You close your eyes for a moment, listening to the gentle breathing around you. In this soundscape, breath itself becomes a kind of night rhythm. It marks the passing of time, the presence of life. You think about how many villagers must have woken in the night to see these drifting clouds in the air, perhaps feeling a moment of quiet wonder before returning to sleep. When you sit up again, you glance at the door. Frost is gathering along its edges. You can almost imagine your breath floating toward it and freezing into the wood. You touch the floor and feel the cold radiating upward in waves. The house breathes with you, inhales cold air through cracks, exhales warmth through smoke holes and traps moisture inside. It is alive in its own way. You rise slowly and walk toward the hearth once more, letting the faint warmth meet you halfway. Even here your breath still clouds the air, but the mist dissolves faster. You stand there quietly for a moment, appreciating how something as simple as visible breath shaped the nightly awareness of medieval people. It reminded them of their own fragility. It showed them how close coldness always lingered, and it kept them mindful of survival. You take one final, slow breath, watch it drift like a pale ribbon, and let it vanish above the firelight before you turn inward to explore the symphony of winter sounds that filled these long frozen nights. You stand still beside the hearth, letting the faint warmth settle over your fingers as you tilt your head and listen more closely to the room around you. The cold has sharpened your senses, and in the quiet of this winter night every sound carries a kind of weight. Medieval nights were never truly silent. They breathed and shifted with their own character. You take a slow step backward away from the fire and close your eyes for a moment to let your ears guide you. The first sound you notice is the wood itself. The beams above you creak gently, stretching the way old trees do in winter. The roof timbers have endured countless seasons of wind and frost, and they sigh softly as the chill tightens around them. This steady groan is familiar to villagers. It is the voice of a home settling against the cold. A well-recorded detail in several rural building accounts notes how medieval folk could often identify the stability of their house simply by hearing the timbers each night. You understand that idea now. These sounds are the heartbeat of the structure. You shift your weight and let the straw beneath your feet rustle. That small sound blends seamlessly into the room's nocturnal murmur. You take another step and hear the soft clink of a pot cooling near the hearth. Metal contracts in the cold, producing a delicate tap that echoes briefly then fades. In the silence that follows, you notice the faint crackle of lingering embers. One spark flares, then another. Each tiny burst sounds like a miniature firework in the quiet dark. You wander toward the center of the room again and crouch. The cold floor groans as if complaining. You rub your hands together and focus on the layers of sound that build around you. Beyond the walls, wind roams the village lanes. It whistles through narrow gaps between houses and nudges loose shutters that knock gently against their frames. The rhythm feels almost musical, the kind of melody shaped by winter's unpredictable hand. As you listen more intently, something else emerges from the distance. A low howl. Not human, not entirely comforting. A dog, perhaps, or a wolf roaming the outskirts. That distant call reminds you why families slept together, why doors were barred, and why fires were kept alive. Winter nights belong to more than cold. They belong to the creatures outside that moved silently through the snow. It sends a faint ripple of alertness through your spine even though the sound barely reaches you. You turn your head toward the sleeping family. Their breathing is soft but constant. The small puffs of air they release create a faint whisper. One child snuffles once, perhaps shifting in her dreams. The mother murmurs something without waking, a half-formed word carried away by the cold air. These simple human sounds feel warm. They anchor you in the present, reminding you that life continues even in the harshest seasons. You ease yourself down beside the pallet. The straw rustles loudly enough that you wince, worried you might disturb the sleepers. But they do not stir. They are accustomed to these noises. They know every complaint of the straw and every crack of the rafters. Nights like this likely rock them into rest with a strange, rugged lullaby. You lean forward and listen harder. A soft drip echoes from somewhere near the back wall. Melted frost perhaps finding a path down the cold stones. Water moves with determination even in winter, and its rhythm becomes part of the nocturnal tapestry. You trace the sound with your eyes following it along the wall. It reminds you that medieval homes often held secret symphonies born from flaws in construction and the movements of nature. You inhale, then let your breath escape slowly. The faint hiss joins the air and dissolves. As you sit there, your ears catch a new sound. A piece of firewood collapses into the ash with a delicate thud. A tiny cascade of sparks rises and disappears. The fire composes its own music, cycling through crackles, pops, and sighs. It is a living presence, one that must be monitored but also cherished. You decide to lie down again, letting your head rest lightly on the straw. From here the sounds become richer. The joints in the walls click softly as the temperature drops further outside. The chickens behind the partition shuffle, settling deeper into their bedding. One clucks quietly in her sleep. Her sound blends with the goat's low rumble as the animal exhales. Their nighttime chorus is gentle and strangely soothing. You realize how much comfort these sounds must have brought to families who shared their homes with animals. The noises reminded them they were not alone in the cold. You stretch your legs and slide your hands under your blanket. You listen for something more, something faint, and it comes. The quiet crunch of distant footsteps on packed snow. A villager heading home late. Perhaps someone checking traps or performing a night duty no one envies. The sound fades quickly, swallowed by winter. As the minutes pass, your ears tune to the softest details. The fabric of a cloak shifting as someone rolls slightly. The faint scratching of a mouse in the corner. the drop of ash falling from the hearth stone. Each sound carries a story, a slice of nightly life that might go unnoticed during the day. For a moment you wonder how many medieval people lay awake listening to these same noises, trying to guess the time from the rhythm of the village around them. Some interpretations of rural diaries suggest that nighttime awareness was more active than today. Without clocks or glowing screens, people interpreted sound as a companion, a reminder of the world turning slowly in the dark. Your eyes drift open again. The fire casts long, trembling shadows that sway with each new sound. The movements on the walls make the room seem alive. You begin to feel as if the house itself breathes with you, shifts with you, keeps vigil beside you. You inhale again, letting the nocturnal symphony fill your senses. It is imperfect. It is full of small disruptions. Yet it is strangely calming. You feel yourself sinking deeper into the moment. Then quietly you rise to your feet, ready to discover how this fragile harmony depended on someone staying alert enough to feed the embers before they died completely. You stand near the hearth once more, letting your fingers linger above the glowing embers. Their warmth feels thin now, stretched too far across the room to offer much comfort. You sense the hour growing deeper, the cold pressing harder against the house. Medieval winter nights were long, impossibly long, and the fire was the fragile thread that tied people to safety. As you kneel to watch the coals pulse, you understand why tending the fire in the middle of the night became an unspoken responsibility shared quietly within every household. You lean closer. The coals glow like a cluster of tired eyes, red at the centre, and fading to grey at the edges. A soft crackle breaks the silence as a small piece of wood collapses, sending tiny sparks rolling across the ash. You brush them gently aside, feeling the heat brush your knuckles. You inhale the scent of the fire, warm and smoky, then exhale slowly. The breath fades into a thin cloud that dances above the embers before disappearing. You reach for the fire poker resting beside the hearth. The metal feels cold, almost painful as you grip it. You stir the embers, turning them carefully. They brighten immediately, glowing with new life, as if grateful for the attention. A modest fact observed in multiple medieval household notes describes how families learned to interpret embers the way others might read stars or clouds. A certain colour, a certain rhythm of crackling a certain way, the ash shifted. All of it held meaning about how much longer the fire would last and when someone needed to rise. You stand again and look toward the sleeping family. They rest in a gentle tangle of limbs and blankets, unaware of your quiet task. One child turns in her sleep. The father shifts slightly, pulling his cloak tighter. None of them stir fully. You can tell they trust the fire to keep them safe. Yet you know the truth. Without regular tending, the hearth could fade into nothing but cold ash, leaving the family vulnerable to the freezing air. You crouch once more. The small log on the hearth has burned down to a half shell of charcoal. You lift it gently with the poker, tucking it deeper into the red centre of the embers. Sparks flutter up like tiny fireflies. You add a small stick to the edge, sliding it under the coals until it catches. This modest act feels surprisingly intimate. You're not simply feeding a fire. You're preserving the warmth that keeps everyone alive until dawn. You think about how medieval families organised this responsibility. Some sources from rural communities mention that children, especially older ones, were often assigned the task of waking during the night to tend the fire because they were light sleepers. Other households rotated the duty among adults, and in some cases no system existed at all. Someone simply woke naturally, felt the cold creeping into their bones, and rose to stir the embers. Scholars who study domestic routines have different interpretations about how formal or informal this practice was, and the variety of opinions highlights how each home shaped its own rhythm. You lift your hand over the fire and imagine the countless nights when someone else knelt in this exact spot, rubbing their hands together, fighting the temptation to crawl back under the covers too soon. The cold always made the task harder. You feel it now. The air behind you presses like ice against your spine, urging you to hurry. But tending a fire is not something to rush. You must coax the flames patiently, like calming a restless child. You place another small stick into the hearth. It crackles immediately, releasing a thin ribbon of smoke. The fire responds with a soft sigh of warmth. You lean closer, adjusting the angle of the stick, nudging a glowing ember against its side. Slowly, very slowly, a small flame curls upward. It flickers once, twice, then holds steady. You sit back on your heels and watch it grow. The tiny flame casts a soft glow across your hands. It is a comforting light, steady and reassuring. But it also reminds you of something important. Fires in medieval homes were dangerous. A spark landing in the wrong place could ignite dry straw or clothing. A collapsing log could roll against a wooden beam. People feared losing their homes to fire almost as much as they feared the cold. A quiet reference in a manorial account mentions that winter fires caused accidents far more often than summer ones, because people slept so close to the flames. Tending the embers became a balancing act between keeping enough heat and preventing disaster. You stand up slowly, stretching your stiff knees. The tiny flame continues to grow, adding a delicate glow to the room. You reach for the small basket of kindling near the hearth. The twigs inside smell faintly of resin and forest bark. You select a few and place them gently on the ember bed. The fire devours them in slow, deliberate bites. A warm sigh fills the room. The sound of the fire changes the atmosphere. It draws the cold back, pushing it toward the walls. The warmth spreads thinly but meaningfully across the floor. You feel it first on your hands, then on your cheeks. You step backward and watch how the family's blankets rise slightly with the new wave of comfort. Their sleep deepens. Their breath grows steadier. Your heart softens again. A small task like this helps protect their dreams. You sit on a stool near the hearth and listen to the fire's small song. Crackles soft, snaps a faint hum. These sounds remind you of the constant awareness medieval families carried. Even in sleep, their instincts remained half awake. One rustle too loud, one draught too sharp, one ember too dim. It could rouse someone from dreams into a blurry but urgent responsibility. This kind of vigilance shaped nightly life far differently than modern routines. You can feel that difference now. You rake the embers one final time and lean back slightly. The flame is small but steady, just enough to keep the frost from taking over. You imagine yourself drifting into a light doze on this stool, waking again when the fire dims, repeating the ritual until first light. But then your focus shifts. You notice something near the corner of the hearth, a frost rim forming along the stones. Evidence that dawn is still distant. Evidence that the cold wants to reclaim every inch of space the fire warms. You touch the stone with your fingertips. It feels cool despite the fire. Winter always presses inward no matter how fiercely the flames resist. You rise once more and take a final look at the room. The fire glows. The family sleeps peacefully. The animals behind the partition stir, faintly soothed by the new warmth drifting toward them. You take in the entire scene with a quiet breath, feeling both the burden and the comfort of the responsibility you just embraced. You return the poker to its place, wipe a bit of ash from your hands, and allow yourself a moment of stillness. The fire crackles in quiet contentment. You close your eyes briefly, letting that soft glow rest behind your eyelids. Then when you open them again, the cold reminds you that morning will not arrive gently. There are other signs of winter's grip to face, including the icy surprises that greet families when they rise before dawn. You step away from the hearth with slow, careful movements, letting the renewed warmth linger on your skin for as long as it can before the cold takes hold again. The difference between those two temperatures feels sharper now that the fire has been stirred. Each step away from the flames draws you deeper into the chill that lives in every corner of the room. Your breath thickens once more in front of your face, and when you turn toward the small clay jars resting near the wall, you notice something faintly glittering along their rims. You kneel beside the jars and reach out. The clay feels icy, almost painful against your fingertips. You slide your hand over the top of one jar and feel a rough crust. When you lift the lid, a brittle crack breaks the silence. Inside, a sheet of ice clings to the surface of the water. You press gently with a finger. The ice does not immediately give. Instead, it resists with a thin hardness before finally breaking in a delicate snap. The cold rushes up your finger, sending a small shiver through your entire arm. As you test the thickness of the ice, you understand that winter here never stays outside. It crawls into every container, every tool, every morning ritual. A detail preserved in several seasonal household accounts notes that water often froze indoors during harsh winters, even when a fire burned all night. People woke expecting to break ice before they could drink or cook. You feel the truth of that deeply as you stare into the jar's frigid heart. You lift the jar carefully, feeling how heavy and cold it is. Your fingers ache slightly from the chill. You imagine someone waking before dawn, half shivering and half dreaming, reaching for this same jar with stiff hands. They would tap the ice break it scooped away and try to ignore the sting in their knuckles. You picture the morning tasks unfolding slowly in the dark. Fetching more water meant stepping outside into the biting air, sometimes with snow up to the knees. So families kept jars inside, hoping they would not freeze too solid. Hope did not always win. You set the jar back down and examine the small wooden ladle beside it. The ladle's curved bowl has a thin crust of frost around the rim. You tap it lightly. A few tiny flakes fall onto the straw floor. The water within the ladle has frozen in place, holding a faint impression of the last pour. It is a quiet reminder of how the cold reached into every corner of the daily routine. You look over at the sleeping family and wonder how many mornings they greeted with numb fingers and frozen lips. Perhaps they pushed the ice aside with practiced indifference. Perhaps they grumbled gently at the inconvenience. Some mentions in rural diaries suggest that people often joked about the cold, turning even their tools into stubborn creatures. A cup that refused to pour, a pot that held broth, stiff as jelly. Humour softened the hardship just enough to keep spirits from sinking too low. You wrap your fingers around another jar smaller and made of darker clay. When you lift it, the bottom has stuck to the floor. A soft crack separates it from the frost rim forming beneath it. The clay hums faintly against your palm as if the cold vibrates through it. When you tilt it, shards of ice rattle inside like tiny bones. You smile at the sound despite the discomfort. There is something oddly charming about the way ice sings inside pottery. You open the jar. Frozen layers cling to the sides, forming jagged peaks and valleys. You run a finger along the rim. The cold bites sharply. You withdraw your hand and blow into your palm for warmth. You imagine villagers doing this repeatedly throughout winter mornings. Breath becoming their first tool, thawing fingers, warming the edges of jars, preparing hands for the tasks ahead. You glance toward the hearth again. The flames flicker, casting weak lines of light across the floor. The glow barely reaches the jars, leaving them trapped in their own small winter. You stand and carry one jar, a little closer to the fire. As you hold it in the light, steam begins to rise faintly from the thawing ice. The transformation feels almost magical, as if you are coaxing life back into something sleeping too deeply. You rest the jar on a low stool and watch the ice soften. The firelight glows through it in warm amber tones. A gentle drip forms on the inside wall. Each drop hits the bottom with a delicate plink. This soft rhythm feels like the first hint of morning, a reminder that daylight eventually brings warmth, even if only a small amount. You move back to the wall to check another jar. This one is sealed with a cloth tied tightly around the top. When you pull the cloth away, your fingers brush ice flakes caught in the weave. You lift the jar and tilt it slightly. A thin crack forms along the frozen surface, splitting the ice into uneven pieces. The sound is small, almost playful. You imagine children fascinated by this tapping on frozen jars and watching the ice shift like tiny puzzle pieces. You rub your hands along your sleeves trying to restore warmth. Your fingertips still sting. You feel the cold settling deeper into your bones now. This is the hour when temperature reaches its lowest point. Medieval families often dreaded this moment. Several small observations in seasonal writings suggest that people believed the coldest part of the night tested courage and patience more than any other time. Whether or not this belief was widely held is unclear, but the sentiment feels real as you kneel beside the frozen water. You lean in to examine the floor. Frost creeps across the edges near the jars, forming delicate white veins along the packed earth. You touch one with a fingertip. It melts instantly, leaving a small wet mark. The cold makes the floor feel like stone, and you understand now why families curled tightly in the warmest part of the room. Waking early and stepping onto this icy ground must have been a shock every single day. You gather all the jars and set them near the hearth in a tidy row. The small heat from the fire begins to spread through them. You sit beside them, rubbing your arms and watching as the ice slowly retreats. Water drips softly inside each container. The quiet chorus of melting ice becomes strangely relaxing. A gentle reminder that warmth, even a small amount, always returns. As the jars thaw, you take a slow breath. The cold still clings to the room, but the fire pushes back with quiet determination. You reach out to touch one jar again. The clay feels less harsh now, almost warm around the edges. You smile at the change. The frost has surrendered its hold. You stand and look across the room, imagining how each winter morning began with this simple struggle. Breaking ice, thawing jars, warming hands, a ritual of resilience repeated countless times. You turn toward the family once more. Their breathing remains steady. The fire glows brighter. The jars soften, and you prepare to explore how entire communities shape their sleep around long winter nights, guided by rhythms older than memory. You rise from beside the thawing jars and step slowly toward the doorway, giving your legs time to adjust, after kneeling on the cold floor for so long. As you move, the room shifts gradually from the stillness of deep night towards something more alive. You listen to the soft mix of breathing fire, crackling, and the faintest hint of movement outside. It is not yet morning, but the winter night has begun to settle into its later rhythm, the stretch of hours when entire villages sleep in patterns shaped by community needs, household duties, and the absence of artificial light. You move closer to the doorframe, feeling curious about how these rhythms moulded every hour of medieval winter rest. You press your hand against the rough wood, feeling tiny ridges and splinters. Beyond the door lies a world that sleeps in cycles, not in a single long rest. You tilt your head and listen through the wood. Somewhere in the distance you hear a faint thud. Perhaps someone is shifting logs in a nearby home. Another sound follows a short creak, maybe from a door closing. This village sleeps as one body. One house quiets, and so do its neighbours. One person stirs, and somewhere else another person wakes just enough to hear it. You return to the hearth area and lower yourself onto a stool. The fire's glow flickers over your knees. Your breath lingers in front of you, dim and slow. You fold your hands in your lap and let the warm light settle around you. It becomes clear that medieval families did not experience sleep the way modern people do. Several studies of historical rest patterns suggest that two-phase sleep was common, especially during winter. People fell asleep early after exhaustion, from long labour, woke for an hour or two in the middle of the night, then returned to sleep until morning. You sense that rhythm in this home. The family breathes in a steady pattern, but you feel the moment approaching when one or two of them might stir, shift, or whisper before drifting back into dreams. You listen closely. Outside, a rooster calls too early for dawn. Perhaps he senses something in the cold. The sound echoes faintly through the walls. You smile at the thought that even animals contribute to the village rhythm. In some winter accounts, people described roosters crowing long before sunrise, confused by moonlight shining on snow. The early crow might annoy the family, but it also reminds you that the broader world is stirring in small, subtle ways. You look across the room at the children. They are still curled together, their breathing soft and almost musical. The mother shifts slightly, perhaps brushing away a draft or adjusting the cloak around her shoulders. She opens her eyes just long enough to glance at the hearth, making sure the fire still shows life, then settles again. You notice her movement with quiet admiration. Even in sleep, people in these homes held a kind of awareness, a half-awake readiness shaped by centuries of necessity. You lean back and let your head rest against the wall. The rough door presses lightly against your hair. You close your eyes for a moment to imagine how villagers created their bedtime routines. They likely ended their days early, gathering near the fire for a final warm drink or a shared story. There are mentions in some village traditions of families reciting simple evening prayers or humming soft tunes before sleep. These rituals helped mark the transition from work to rest, framing the long winter hours ahead. You open your eyes again. The firelight wavers, stretching shadows across the ceiling. You wonder how often children fell asleep before their parents even finished settling down. You picture a father lowering his voice, careful not to wake a baby. A mother smoothing a blanket, whispering reassurance if a draft startled a child awake. These routines repeated night after night, giving structure to a dark season that could otherwise feel endless. You shift forward on the stool and brush your fingertips across the floor. The earth feels cold but familiar. You think about how villagers organized their nights around shared expectations. In some accounts, people described an unspoken village quiet that fell after a certain hour in winter. Voices lowered, tools were put away, neighbours whispered rather than called across lanes. Everyone understood the importance of conserving energy and keeping peace. Sleep was not a private act. It was woven into the life of the entire community. You let your gaze drift toward the window shutters. They vibrate faintly as wind rushes past. The winter night has settled into its second half, calmer now, but no warmer. You imagine how this hour felt for those who lay awake between first sleep and second sleep. Some used the time for prayer, others tended the fire, some simply lay quietly thinking about chores, worries, or hopes. A few small pastoral writings mention people using this time to talk softly with their spouses or check on their children. These quiet moments created a kind of intimacy that daylight rarely allowed. You turn your head toward the goats behind the partition. They shuffle gently in their sleep. One chicken makes a soft peeping noise. These sounds join the wider village rhythm that continues through the night. A single cough from a neighbour's house might carry lightly through the cold. A dog might bark once, then fall silent. The wind's tone might change as snow gathers in new places. All these layers form a living landscape that shapes how people sleep. You sit a little closer to the family, feeling the shared warmth return against your legs. You hear a soft whisper from the father as he stirs briefly, perhaps entering the wakeful gap between his phases of sleep. He murmurs something indistinguishable, adjusts the cloak over his daughter's shoulder, then settles again without fully waking. You sense how natural that rhythm must be. Sleep is not a single long stretch. It is a gentle pattern, rising and falling, shaped by firelight cold and community sound. You let your palms rest on your knees, absorbing the energy of the room as another hour slides quietly past. You think about how these rhythms brought comfort. You also consider how these same rhythms created challenges. People might wake in the middle of the night and worry about food, livestock illness, or harsh weather. Their minds wandered just as yours wanders now, listening to the night breathe. You inhale deeply and rise from the stool. You glance once more at the family, their shapes rising and falling in the flickering light. The rhythms of their sleep feel ancient and enduring, part of a cycle that winter never truly breaks. You brush the cold from your sleeves and step toward the next corner of this winter-bound world, ready to discover how others beyond this home shape their own nightly routines when the cold refused to ease. You step away from the doorframe and move toward the cooler side of the house, where a worn wooden bench sits beneath a small niche in the wall. Above it hangs a simple wooden cross, its edges softened by years of fingers brushing across it. The presence of this cross draws your attention to the influence of monastic traditions on everyday life. Even in humble homes far removed from the stone monasteries, echoes of monastic discipline shaped how families understood cold sleep and nightly endurance during winter. You settle onto the bench, feeling the chill seep through your clothes as you imagine stepping into a very different kind of winter night. You close your eyes for a moment, letting your mind wander toward the cloisters where monks and nuns kept their own quiet rhythms. Their stone chambers were even colder than village homes, often designed with little regard for comfort. In many monastic houses, windows were left unglazed for centuries. The wind roamed freely through open arches, turning the dormitories into icy caverns at night. One well-supported insight from monastic writings explains that sleeping in harsh cold was considered part of spiritual discipline. The discomfort reminded the body of its limits and encouraged humility. You picture monks lying in long rows on simple pallets, wrapped in coarse blankets, united in the shared challenge of enduring the night. You open your eyes again. The wooden cross above you catches the firelight in soft glimmers. Villagers admired monastic endurance. Many stories describe how peasants respected monks precisely because they lived with even fewer comforts. Their habits, meals, and sleeping conditions were simple, strict, and deeply tied to religious purpose. Over time, some of these habits drifted into village life. People believed that enduring hardship without complaint strengthened the spirit. This belief shaped how families faced winter nights. They accepted discomfort with patience, told children to be brave, and taught themselves to see cold as part of God's seasonal rhythm. You shift your weight on the bench and imagine the stone floors of a monastery. Cold radiates upward like a steady tide. Monks slept in their robes, kept their hoods pulled low, and avoided the luxury of personal blankets. In some orders, a single candle or small brazier offered the only warmth in vast dormitory halls. You picture the faint glow sliding across long rows of sleeping forms, the silence broken only by soft breath, rustling wool, or the occasional distant toll of a bell. The cross above you brings your focus back to this home. The resemblance between this household's modest routine and a monastic one becomes clearer. Children here sleep in layers much like novices in training. Adults accept cold nights with quiet resolve. Firewood is rationed the same way monks ration their meals. Silence dominates the late hours. Even the structure of the room with its single communal sleeping area mirrors the shared dormitories of religious houses. You rest your hand on the bench, feeling grooves worn into the wood. You imagine a villager sitting here earlier in the evening, whispering a prayer for a mild winter, perhaps asking for protection, against sickness or frostbite. In many surviving winter chapel notes, priests encouraged families to embrace darkness and cold as part of the divine cycle. Such teachings reinforced the idea that suffering had meaning, something to endure with dignity. Whether or not every villager believed wholeheartedly in this idea, his influence seeped into their nightly habits. You draw your cloak closer and imagine stepping through a monastery gate under the evening sky. The cold wraps around you instantly. Bells call monks to evening prayer. Their chanting echoes through stone corridors, creating a deep resonance that sinks into your bones. After prayer, they retire to their cold beds. Some records describe how monks refrained from warming their hands or feet before lying down, viewing comfort as a distraction from devotion. The idea seems extreme, yet you sense how the philosophy trickled into villages in gentler forms. Many families passed down sayings about strengthening the body by resisting the cold rather than fleeing from it. You shift again, feeling the creeping cold along your wrists. You rub your hands together and recall that nuns often rose long before dawn for their first prayers, stepping from cold beds into colder corridors. Their breath formed pale clouds before their faces. Their feet moved silently across stone floors. Their routines impressed villagers who admired their discipline but never envied their conditions. You rest your back against the wall. It feels cold through your clothes. You imagine a monk resting his head briefly against a stone pillar during a midnight vigil. His breath shimmers in the frozen air. His hands tremble slightly from the chill, yet he persists in prayer. This image helps explain why villagers saw winter nights not merely as hardship, but as opportunities to demonstrate strength, faith, and resilience. You let your gaze drift once more to the cross above you. Tiny cracks run through the wood filled with age and memory. It reminds you that spiritual presence was a comfort during cold nights. Families prayed before sleep. They whispered blessings over children. They thanked the fire for surviving one more day and asked for protection until dawn. You feel the weight of those traditions as you sit there. Then you think again of monastic influence in a more practical sense. Some monastic houses experimented with small tricks to stay warm, layering wool, placing stones near hearths before sleep, keeping animals nearby in certain rural orders, or using tightly woven cloaks as bedding. These techniques sometimes spread to surrounding villages. A quiet exchange of survival knowledge passed along through conversations with monks or through travellers who visited monasteries for shelter. You lift your hands to warm them near your mouth. Your breath glows faintly in the dim light. You imagine a monk doing the same during a long night of copying manuscripts, the cold stiffening his fingers as he worked. Even religious dedication could not escape winter's reach. You rise from the bench and step closer to the cross. You touch it gently with your fingertips. The wood feels smooth and cool. You whisper a thought, not quite a prayer, but something close. The feeling is natural in this setting. Cold nights invite quiet reflection. You lower your hand slowly, then glance back at the sleeping family. Their peaceful shapes glow faintly in the reflected firelight. You feel a renewed appreciation for their patience and strength. You give the cross one last look, and then step away from the bench, ready to follow the faint traces of footsteps and stories from those who wandered through winter nights seeking warmth wherever hospitality allowed. You leave the quiet corner beneath the wooden cross and move toward the doorway once again. The cold air leaking through the cracks draws a faint path across the floor, and you follow it as if trailing the memory of someone who once stood here before you. The fire behind you offers only a soft glow, now barely reaching your back, and as you stand near the threshold, the temperature drops sharply. This is the place where travellers once paused, shivering, hesitant to knock, hoping that someone inside would share a little warmth. You rest your hand on the doorframe and imagine how many weary strangers sought refuge during winter nights, relying on the kindness of families who had little, but still gave enough to keep someone alive until morning. You ease the door open a crack. A burst of freezing air rushes in, biting at your cheeks. Snow has blown across the entryway, leaving thin wind-carved lines. You look outward for a moment, letting the silence stretch. The village sleeps in darkness, but you know that the paths remain active in quiet ways. Travellers, messengers, poor wanderers, and even peddlers sometimes moved under moonlight, hoping to reach the next settlement before the cold defeated them. You imagine the soft crunch of their footsteps, the weight of a bundle on their shoulder, and the way their breath floated like faint ghosts in the air. You step back inside and close the door gently. As you turn around, you picture one such wanderer standing here with trembling hands, politely asking for shelter. There is a consistent observation in several preserved hospitality customs that even the poorest homes kept a small space near the hearth for unexpected guests. It was rarely luxurious, often just a bit of floor space, a scrap of wool, or a shared blanket. But offering warmth was both moral duty and community necessity. In regions where winter could be lethal, refusing a traveller could weigh heavily on the conscience. You walk toward the middle of the room again, standing beside the pallet where the family sleeps. You imagine the scene shifting with the arrival of a stranger at the door. The father would wake first. He would greet the traveller with caution, then gauge the situation. A cold, hungry wanderer was usually welcomed without hesitation, but there were unspoken rules. A guest had to settle quietly. A guest had to stay to one side of the hearth. A guest had to respect the fragile balance of warmth within the room. You picture the father rising, offering a small nod and gesturing the traveller toward the fire. You lower yourself to the floor and sit where a visitor might have rested. The heat here is faint but comforting. You sense how grateful a traveller must have felt. Your own body feels the difference instantly, and you take a slow breath, letting warmth creep into your cold fingers. You imagine a wanderer warming hands stiff from gripping a walking stick. Perhaps they would remove worn boots, revealing toes chilled to the edge of pain. A few medieval travel accounts mention that strangers often cried quietly upon reaching a warm hearth, after long journeys through winter roads. There is something deeply moving about that image. A silent tear slipping down a frost-burned face. Relief arriving like a soft wave. You rub your arms and picture the family accommodating that extra presence. They would shift closer together, perhaps sharing blankets more tightly. They would offer a bowl of thin broth or a hunk of stale bread softened with warm liquid. Generosity in winter rarely meant abundance. It meant sharing from scarcity. And yet many villagers believed that hospitality brought blessings. A few rural tales hint that refusing a traveller on a freezing night invited misfortune, though the truth of this belief varies between communities. You rise and walk toward the hearth, kneeling where the traveller might sit. You rest your hands over the embers. The fire feels welcoming. You imagine the visitor curled beside it, wrapped in whatever worn cloak they carried. You listen to the soft breaths of the sleeping family. Their trust in their home and in one another creates a tender silence. Into this silence steps a stranger carrying stories, secrets, or troubles. You imagine how these stories would emerge slowly, perhaps spoken in hushed tones once the stranger regained enough warmth to speak. You picture the father stirring from sleep to ask where the traveller came from. The mother might inquire if they were hungry. A child curious and half awake might peek from beneath a blanket. These small interactions shaped winter nights across countless generations. Travellers exchanged news. They spoke of weather roads, danger, and distant places the villagers would never see. These conversations forged invisible threads between communities. You touch the edge of a wooden bowl sitting beside the hearth. The rim is smooth from use. Perhaps earlier in the evening it held broth for the family. You imagine it being offered to a traveller with simple kindness. A quiet record from a merchant's diary mentions that the warmth of a shared meal in winter was more valuable than coins. You feel the truth in that as you lift the bowl and imagine sipping hot liquid while huddled close to a small fire. You listen again to the room. A goat behind the partition shifts. The fire crackles. The wind outside hums against the shutters. You picture the traveller listening as well, thinking about home or the next leg of the journey. Many wanderers likely replayed memories in their minds while resting in borrowed warmth. Perhaps they thought of family far away or of mistakes that pushed them onto the road. Winter has a way of drawing old thoughts to the surface, especially in the quiet hours when sleep comes slowly. You sit a little closer to the fire, imagining the physical closeness that must have occurred between households and their unexpected guests. The idea of personal space did not exist the way it does today. Warmth required bodies near one another. If a visitor needed to sleep, they would lie near the fire or beside the family if space allowed. You imagine the slight awkwardness of a stranger sharing a pallet with the household. But you also sense an underlying grace. Winter taught people to adapt, to share, to forgive and convenience. You close your eyes briefly and picture a scene. A traveller enters the house late at night, snow clinging to their cloak. The father welcomes them with a nod. The mother hands them a blanket. The children stare with sleepy curiosity. The stranger settles down, pressing cold hands against the chest to restore feeling. A soft conversation begins perhaps about the road behind them or the village ahead. Small details exchanged in warm light. Then silence settles as exhaustion draws the visitor into sleep. You open your eyes again and notice how the fire reflects in the clay jars that have now thawed beside the hearth. The traveller upon waking might see the same reflections. They might rise quietly, thank the family and leave before sunrise to continue the journey. And the home would return to its normal rhythm, carrying a faint echo of the visitor's presence. You stand, slowly feeling the cold pull at your ankles. You give the room a final look, imagining all the nights shaped by unexpected footsteps at the door. All the stories carried across snowy roads. All the moments of kindness exchanged between those who needed warmth and those who had little to spare. Then you turn toward the darker corner of the house, where sickness once found its way into winter nights, influencing sleep in ways even warmth could not easily soothe. You walk slowly toward the far corner of the house, where the darkness feels heavier and the air slightly thicker. Even without seeing anything clearly, you sense the shift. This is the part of winter life that people rarely described in cheerful stories, yet it shaped medieval nights just as deeply as cold or hunger. You lower yourself onto a small wooden stool and let your eyes adjust to the shadows. Here you imagine is where a sick child might lie, or an aging grandparent or someone fighting off a winter cough that refuses to leave. Illness and sleep shared a complicated relationship in the Middle Ages, and you can almost feel the quiet anxiety that settled into homes whenever sickness lingered. You sit still for a moment listening. The crackling fire feels far away here. The warmth barely reaches your feet. This part of the room holds a deeper cold, the kind that settles into bones and tightens muscles. You breathe slowly, feeling the chill wrap around your ribs. No wonder sickness thrived in winter. Cold homes, damp air, and exhausted bodies created perfect conditions for coughs, fevers, and long nights of worry. You reach out and touch a fabric bundle resting on a low pallet. The cloth is rough but warmer than expected. Someone must have slept here recently. You imagine a mother sitting on this stool hours ago, placing a damp cloth on her child's forehead, whispering comforting words between shivers. A familiar observation in medieval healing notes describes how families cared for the sick with simple gestures, warm drinks, layers of blankets, gentle rubbing of hands and feet, and prayers spoken softly through the night. Professional healers existed, but during winter, families often relied on each other. You slide your fingertips beneath the blanket. The straw underneath feels uneven, as if someone had been tossing and turning. You picture a child coughing, waking every few minutes, drawing tired sighs from a parent too fatigued to fully rest. Winter illness often meant restless sleep for the entire household. A single sick body changed the rhythm of the night. Instead of quiet breathing and soft rustling, the room filled with wheezes, sniffles, moans, and murmured reassurances. You lift a small clay cup sitting beside the pallet. The inside smells faintly of herbs. Perhaps someone mixed a simple remedy here earlier. A combination of thyme honey or heated wine used in many rural recipes to soothe sore throats. You raise the cup to your nose. The faint sweetness lingers like a memory. You think about how comforting such a drink must have been in a freezing room with no medicinal heat, except the fire's glow. You set the cup down gently and look toward the wall. A small cloth pouch hangs from a wooden peg. When you take it down and squeeze it lightly, the scent of dried chamomile drifts out. Aromatic herbs were common in sick rooms believed to chase away harmful air. Whether these herbs helped much is still unclear, but they certainly brought a bit of calm into gloomy winter nights. Some healers insisted that gentle scents helped ease sleep. Others argued that disease spread no matter what herbs hung in the air. Opinions differed, as they often did. You let the pouch rest in your lap and close your eyes for a moment. The imagined sounds of sickness begin to form in your mind. A ragged cough, a whispered plea for water, the soft footsteps of a parent approaching the hearth to warm a cloth. These sounds blend with the wind outside and the crackle of the fire. You feel the exhaustion of someone who has been caring for a loved one throughout the night, torn between the need to rest and the instinct to stay awake. You open your eyes and run your hand along the edge of the pallet again. The blankets feel heavier here, layered more thickly than the family uses on their main bedding. You can imagine why. Sickness chills the body, and keeping a sick person warm was essential. A modest detail noted in several monastic infirmary records suggests that even monasteries known for strict living allowed extra blankets for the ill. Warmth was a form of medicine, even when no other treatment existed. You lift one of the blankets. It carries a scent of smoke and herbs. You picture a mother or father pressing it gently around a feverish child, trying to hold in warmth while also letting fresh air reach their skin. That fragile balance between heat and breath shaped winter care. Too much covering might worsen a fever. Too little could draw dangerous cold into the chest. You place the blanket back and listen again. The house is quiet. No one in this room is sick at the moment. Yet the space still remembers the presence of illness. You feel it lingering like breath on cold glass. Winter brought fear into homes. A cough could take weeks to heal. A fever might flare suddenly in the night. Families watched one another closely, their sleep lighter and shorter when someone was unwell. You rise slowly and walk to the small shelf above the pallet. A bowl sits there with a cracked rim. Inside are remnants of crushed herbs. Some folk practices suggested that ground mustard seeds or heated onions placed near the chest could ease coughing. You touch the inside of the bowl. The faint scent stings your nose slightly. You imagine someone preparing this mixture in dim light, hoping it would help even a little. You take a few steps back, noticing how the cold feels sharper in this corner. Illness and cold seem to chase each other through medieval winters. People whispered prayers at night, asking for protection from chills, coughs and spirits believed to roam in heavy air. You feel a quiet shiver at the thought. Even the most sceptical villagers probably felt unease on nights when sickness spread through homes one by one. You kneel again beside the pallet and rest your palm on the blanket. The texture feels softer now, warmed by your hand. You linger a moment, sensing the weight of all the winter nights this corner has witnessed. Nights when sleep was shallow. Nights when fear sat beside the fire. Nights when a parent stayed awake counting breaths in the dark. You inhale slowly, letting the cold settle into your lungs, then stand once more. You give the space a gentle glance before turning away. The room grows brighter near the hearth. The family sleeps peacefully. But sickness, when it came, changed everything. It shaped winter sleep just as deeply as straw fire or cloaks. You rub your arms for warmth and prepare to step into another influence of winter nights, the world of superstition and invisible fears that shaped what people believed might lurk in the darkness beyond their walls. You rise slowly from the sick corner, rubbing your hands together as if shaking off the heaviness that illness brings to any winter night. As you walk toward the centre of the room again, you become aware of something else that has lived quietly beneath every detail of this home. The medieval world was not shaped by cold and hunger alone. Winter darkness carried its own kind of imagination. Shadows stretched longer, noises felt sharper, and the thin light of a single fire could not always push back the stories people whispered about what moved unseen after sunset. You lower yourself onto a low wooden chest, and let your eyes wander to the dim edges of the room, where the glow fades into soft gloom. You sit still for a moment. A cold draught moves behind you, brushing your neck like a fingertip. You do not immediately turn. Instead, you allow yourself to imagine how a medieval villager might have reacted. In winter, when wind moaned through the cracks and frost glittered across windows, people felt the presence of more than weather. They felt the presence of beliefs, fears, and lingering tales that travelled from village to village. The night was not empty. It was crowded with old stories. You lean forward slightly and scan the room. The fire now lower casts trembling shadows across the walls. They flicker like dark shapes moving in slow, uncertain patterns. Your breath clouds faintly as you exhale, and even that small vapour looks ghostly under the thin light. You rub your thumb across the lid of the chest beneath you, and recall that in many households winter nights were said to be the time when restless souls wandered closest to the living. This idea appears again and again in folktale collections, not always taken literally, but never dismissed entirely. You shift your weight and listen to the faint rustle of animals behind the partition. The goat sighs softly. A chicken adjusts its feathers. These noises anchor you in the present, but beyond them, you sense how the medieval imagination turned every unexplained bump or whisper into something alive. You remember hearing stories described in old gatherings about spirits drifting through doorways, or creatures roaming the dark that were neither animal nor human. Whether such tales reflected belief or merely entertainment is uncertain, but they shaped the nightly atmosphere deeply. You turn your head toward a small wooden charm hanging above the door. It is carved in a simple spiral, worn smooth by fingers touching it over many years. You rise, walk toward it, and lift it gently. The charm feels light and polished. A few preserved rural traditions explain that charms like this were placed near doors to guard against cold spirits or misfortune that might slip into the home at night. People believed that certain symbols could confuse harmful forces or keep wandering souls from crossing thresholds. The charm here carries both the simplicity of everyday life and the quiet hope for protection. You let the charm fall back against the wood and stand there in silence. The room stills. The fire shifts with a soft pop. You imagine a family telling stories earlier in the evening before sleep, using old tales to pass the time as darkness gathered. Tales of winter spirits who followed travellers, tales of wandering lights drifting across snowy fields, tales of creatures who disliked warmth and watched from the shadows. Some stories were warnings for children, others offered explanations for strange winter events. Still others lived simply as tradition shaped by centuries of repetition. You step away from the door and return to the centre of the room. You lower yourself onto the straw near the hearth and look into the glowing coals. Their shapes change constantly, opening into little red mouths that seem to whisper. You tilt your head and imagine how someone half asleep might interpret these shapes. Firelight can play tricks, especially when exhaustion makes the mind wander. You understand how people confused shadows for figures, how they imagined movement in corners where nothing moved, how they believed that winter darkness sharpened the boundary between living and dead. You draw your cloak tighter around your shoulders. A slight shiver runs through you, not entirely from cold. The silence deepens. You lean one hand on the floor, feeling the chilled earth, and think about how superstition offered comfort as much as fear. When someone lit a candle by the hearth or placed herbs near the window, they were not simply defending against invisible threats. They were claiming a sense of control over the unknown. One gentle explanation found in pastoral writing suggests that people did these rituals not because they expected immediate results, but because they felt less alone in the cold when they performed them. You shift slightly, noticing a small cloth pouch tucked under the edge of the hearthstone. When you pull it out, a faint scent of rosemary escapes. This herb appears often in stories about protection, believed to purify the air and keep nightmares at bay. You smile faintly at the thought. Perhaps the family placed it there deliberately. Perhaps someone tucked it away months ago and forgot. Either way, the pouch lies on the floor like a small promise of safety. You place it back carefully and sit upright again. The fire dims and the shadows grow longer. Winter nights stretched for hours, and during those hours imaginations wandered freely. Some families believed that sleeping with one foot outside a blanket invited spirits to tug it. Others believed that certain dreams signaled weather changes. You picture a child waking from a dream and telling the mother that a shadow spoke to them. The mother would listen calmly, then explain gently that the dream meant nothing harmful unless repeated 3 times. Beliefs and patterns intertwined, creating small rituals that helped families navigate their fear of the unseen. You look toward the window shutter. A soft tapping sound echoes once, twice. Perhaps a branch brushing the outside wall. Perhaps ice shifting in the wind. But in medieval imaginations, such noises belonged to more mysterious possibilities. People spoke of winter spirits knocking on windows to test the bravery of those inside. You feel a slight prickling at the back of your neck and smile at your own reaction. Stories have power even when you know they are only stories. You turn toward the sleeping family. They breathe softly, untouched by these shadows and whispers. They have grown up with these tales, meaning they know how to sleep through the uncertainty. Fear here is quiet, woven gently into the fabric of night. It does not dominate. It coexists with daily life. You stand and brush straw from your hands. You take one final look at the dim corners, the charm above the door, the pouch near the hearth, and the flickering coals that almost seem to blink. You exhale slowly and feel a sense of calm settle through you. Superstition shaped winter sleep not through terror, but through stories that helped people feel connected to one another and to a world they did not fully understand. You take a quiet step forward, letting the shadows fade behind you, as you prepare to explore how winter sleep touched even the smallest members of the household, shaping their earliest memories in ways that lingered for a lifetime. You turn from the door and let your steps carry you toward the pallet, where the smallest shapes lie curled beneath thick folds of wool and patched linen. The fire has dimmed into a low cradle of orange light, and its soft glow brushes the edges of the children's faces. Their cheeks look flushed from shared warmth, their tiny breaths forming faint wisps in the cold air. You kneel beside them, carefully lowering yourself into the hush that surrounds sleeping children in winter. There is a gentleness here, a kind of fragile peace, as if the cold itself hesitates to touch them too roughly. You rest your hand lightly on the straw near their heads. The bedding is warmer than the rest of the floor, shaped by their small bodies, pressed together through the night. Children in medieval winters slept as close to their parents or siblings as possible. A widely noted detail in household narratives explains that young ones rarely slept alone, especially during the coldest months. Their warmth was too precious, their vulnerability too great. As you watch their tiny chests rise and fall, you understand exactly why families arrange themselves to keep the littlest ones tucked safely in the warm centre. You shift a bit closer, careful not to disturb them. The older child sighs softly, her lips parting just enough to release a faint warm breath that fogs briefly above the blanket. The younger child has one hand tucked under her cheek, fingers curled as if holding onto a small dream. You feel the tenderness in the air, a quiet mixture of love and necessity. In winter, affection became survival. Holding a child close meant holding warmth close. Caring for them through the cold meant caring for the entire family's future. You stroke the blanket covering their legs. The fabric is coarse, worn and patched, yet it carries an unmistakable warmth that has gathered from hours of shared sleep. You imagine how children understood winter nights through texture and sensation long before they understood the seasons. They grew up learning that cold reached under doors like an invisible creature, that warmth lived where bodies gathered, and that nighttime meant huddling together rather than spreading apart. You lift your hand slightly and glance at the small wooden toy lying beside the older child. It is carved in the shape of a horse, though its legs are uneven and its body slightly twisted. The toy feels smooth from years of fingers sliding across it. You pick it up gently. A line of tiny grooves along its back tells you someone once traced patterns here to comfort themselves before falling asleep. For medieval children, toys were few but treasured. They accompanied little ones into winter nights like tiny guardians, helping them drift to sleep despite the cold. You place the toy back and observe the rise and fall of both children's blankets. You think about the dreams they might have. Perhaps they dream of summer fields, perhaps of warm bread, perhaps of running barefoot without fear of frostbite. In some writings on childhood memory, adults recalled that their earliest winters were filled with the sensation of warmth pressed against family members, mixed with the sharp bite of cold air on their noses when they rolled the wrong way in sleep. These memories endured into old age, shaping how people remembered their earliest years. You brush your fingers across the straw beneath the pallet. It is softer here, flattened by the weight of little bodies night after night. You imagine a parent smoothing this straw before bedtime, whispering to the children to lie still, to keep their feet tucked under the blankets, to hold on to each other. Parents in winter learned to read their children's shivers as clearly as their words. They knew when a child needed another layer, when they needed to move closer to the fire, or when illness threatened to disrupt the harmony of the night. You sit a little closer to the children, letting their shared warmth reach your hands. Their innocence creates a stark contrast with the cold surrounding the room. You picture them waking at dawn with pink noses and tangled hair, rubbing frost from their eyelashes. Perhaps they giggle when warm breath fogs the air. Children see wonder where adults see hardship. Even winter's bite can feel playful when you're small and wrapped in the safety of your family. You look toward the wall where faint drawings shimmer in the dim light, simple shapes carved with dull knives or scratched with small stones. Circles, animals, perhaps even stars. You smile at the thought that children before falling asleep may have traced these shapes, letting imagination ease them into rest. One descriptive remark found in early childhood reflections notes that winter nights felt enormous and mysterious to young minds. Shadows became stories. The fire became a gentle companion. And sleep felt like sinking into a warm pocket of dreams while cold surrounded the world outside. You lean back slightly as the younger child stirs. She shifts her head, tucking her face deeper into the blanket. A tiny sound escapes her lips somewhere between a sigh and a murmur. You pause, watching closely, but she returns to peaceful breathing almost immediately. Children were resilient, but winter demanded care even while they slept. Parents checked them often through the night, making sure blankets stayed in place, ensuring no draft found its way to tender skin. You reach for the edge of the older child's blanket and pull it gently up to her shoulder. The fabric rustles softly. You feel a bit like a guardian yourself watching over them, while the cold presses quietly against the walls. There is something soothing about this moment. The fire glows faintly. The children sleep deeply. The wind outside hums low and distant. You sense the timelessness of these nights, the same ritual repeated across countless winters, in countless homes where children slept through cold season after cold season, held close by warmth and love. You rise slowly, careful not to wake them. As you stand, their small breaths continue in steady rhythm, soft and reassuring. You look down at them one last time, letting their peaceful form settle into your thoughts. Winter may have been harsh, but childhood dreams softened its edges. With quiet steps, you turn toward the hearth again, ready to face the moment when dawn begins to stir, pulling everyone from sleep into the harsh necessities of a winter morning. You rise from the children's side and let your feet guide you back toward the faint glow of the hearth. The coals have settled into a deep red bed, pulsing quietly like a tired heartbeat. The room feels even colder now. This is the hour just before dawn, when winter presses its hardest, when even sleepers curl tighter, sensing the chill without fully waking. You take a slow breath, watching your exhale drift upward in a pale ribbon. Morning is coming, but it will not arrive gently. Medieval dawns demanded effort, strength, and the will to move before warmth returned. You step toward the door. Frost clings to the bottom of the wooden planks, forming delicate white lace along the frame. When you touch it lightly, the frost melts beneath your fingertip, leaving a tiny drop of cold water. That small reaction reminds you how fragile the warmth of the room really is. One slip in tending the fire, one long gust of wind, and the cold would reclaim the entire space within minutes. You feel a brief shiver travel through your spine. You turn back toward the hearth and kneel beside it. The coals glow faintly, just enough to cast a quiet shimmer across the floor. You know that in a few moments someone in the family will need to rise, gather kindling, and coax a flame from these tired embers. Many winter accounts reference the same morning ritual. Before anything else could happen, the fire needed to live again. Without it, water remained frozen, hands stayed stiff, and breath hung in the air like smoke. You imagine the father, waking first, rubbing his arms, sitting up with a soft groan, then leaning forward to check the coals. You brush a small piece of wood aside. The cold edge of the hearthstone presses against your knees. You pick up a stick and lay it gently on the embers. It does not catch at once. Instead, a faint thread of smoke curls upward. You lean closer. Your breath nudges the smoke slightly. You picture a medieval villager doing the same, breathing warm air onto the embers, whispering encouragement under their breath, hoping the fire decides to live. You rise again and look around the room. The family still sleeps, but signs of mourning drift through their bodies. The mother stirs slightly, pulling her cloak higher over one shoulder. The father shifts, folding one leg over the other. Even the children twitch and sigh, sensing a change in the night. You feel the anticipation of the household preparing to wake,